The private dining room at the Golden Crest, nestled in the heart of New York City's financial district, was a sanctuary of opulence, a world apart from the frenetic pulse of the streets below. Its walls, paneled in rich dark walnut, gleamed under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier that hung like a constellation frozen in time, casting prismatic light across a long mahogany table. The table itself was a work of art, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen, adorned with fine bone china, sterling silver cutlery, and crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds. A single expansive window framed the glittering skyline of Manhattan, the city's towers stretching into the night like a galaxy of ambition. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck truffle oil and the faint tang of aged wine. But beneath the decadence simmered a tension so palpable it seemed to hum in the silence. This was no ordinary dinner. It was a battlefield disguised as a business meeting where a deal worth $500 million hung in the balance, and every word, every glance was a calculated move in a high-stakes game. On one side of the table sat Edward Langston and Victor Hayes, two titans of the tech industry, whose reputations preceded them like a storm cloud. Edward, the CEO of Langston Biotech, was a man in his late 50s, his silver hair meticulously styled, his navy suit tailored to perfection. His face, lined with the faint creases of a life spent in boardrooms, carried a smile that was all charm and no warmth, his pale blue eyes glinting with the cold precision of a chess master. Beside him, Victor Hayes, the vice president of strategic acquisitions, was a younger, sharper version of the same archetype. His jet-black hair was slicked back, his charcoal suit cut to accentuate his athletic frame, and his grin was wide, almost boyish, but his eyes betrayed the same predatory hunger as Edward's. They were here to close the deal of a lifetime, the acquisition of Tanaka Biolabs, a Japanese firm at the forefront of biointegrative technology, a company that could catapult Langston Biotech into a new stratosphere of wealth and influence. Their confidence was palpable, their posture relaxed, yet commanding, as if they owned not just the room, but the very air within it. Across from them sat Kiyomi Tanaka, the enigmatic owner of Tanaka Biolabs, a woman whose presence seemed to defy the expectations of the two men. She was in her late 60s, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight, elegant bun, her posture ramrod straight, exuding a quiet dignity that seemed to belong to another era. Her dark silk dress was unadorned, save for a single jade pendant that hung at her throat, its simplicity a stark contrast to the ostentatious wealth around her. Her face was a mask of calm, her dark eyes deep and unreadable, giving nothing away. Beside her sat Samuel Lin, her trusted aide and translator, a man in his early 30s with a reserved demeanor and an impeccable suit that mirrored his employer's understated elegance. Samuel's expression was neutral, his eyes fixed on a point just beyond the table, as if he were a silent sentinel rather than a participant in the drama unfolding before him. The room was a stage, and Kiyomi was its most inscrutable player. Her silence a puzzle that Edward and Victor were determined to solve and exploit. The tension in the room had begun the moment Kiyomi arrived. Edward had extended a hand, his smile wide, and practiced expecting a warm, accented greeting in English. Instead, Kiyomi had spoken in Japanese, her voice soft and melodic, a stream of syllables that flowed like a river, beautiful but incomprehensible to the two executives. Samuel had stepped in smoothly, his English crisp and professional. "Ms. Tanaka is honored to be here and appreciates your hospitality." He translated his tone neutral but precise. Edward had laughed a forced, hearty sound that didn't quite mask his discomfort. "Of course, a pleasure," he said, his eyes flicking to Victor, who raised an eyebrow in response. Tell her we're thrilled to have her." The exchange set the tone for the evening, a stilted dance of words filtered through Samuel, each sentence a reminder of the chasm between the two sides of the table. As the appetizers were served, a delicate arrangement of seared tuna with yuzu glaze and microgreens, Edward leaned forward, his voice dripping with corporate charm. "Ms. Tanaka, your work in biointegrative neural interfaces is nothing short of revolutionary. With our global distribution network, we can take your technology to every corner of the world. Together, we can redefine what's possible." He paused, his smile expectant, waiting for Samuel to translate. Samuel leaned toward Kiyomi, murmured quietly in Japanese, and received a brief, measured response. "Ms. Tanaka acknowledges the potential for collaboration." Samuel relayed his voice as flat as a legal document. Edward's smile tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. He was used to commanding rooms, to eliciting awe and agreement with his polished rhetoric. This halting one-sentence response felt like a slap, a deliberate withdrawal of the enthusiasm he expected. Victor, less patient, leaned toward Edward, his voice low, but not low enough. "What's her deal, Ed? Is this some kind of power play making us jump through hoops with this translator nonsense?" Edward's eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice steady, his tone that of a man placating a restless subordinate. "Relax, Victor. This is how they do business. It's about respect hierarchy. Play the game. The prize is worth it." But the game, as Victor saw it, was infuriating. Every question they posed, every glowing promise of synergy and profit, was met with the same pattern: a long-winded pitch from them, a whisper from Samuel to Kiyomi, a brief Japanese reply, and a translated sentence that revealed nothing. It was like negotiating with a sphinx, and Victor's patience was fraying with every passing minute. Kiyomi, for her part, seemed untouched by their growing agitation. Her eyes, sharp and observant, followed their every move, lingering on the way Edward's fingers tightened around his wine glass, the way Victor's foot tapped restlessly under the table. Occasionally, she spoke directly to them in Japanese, her voice soft but deliberate, her head tilted slightly as if posing a question. "Miss Tanaka asks if you enjoyed your recent trip to Singapore. Mr. Langston." Samuel translated, his face unreadable. Edward blinked, caught off guard. "Oh yes, it was productive." "A great city," he said, his smile faltering as he wondered how she knew about the trip. Moments later, she spoke again, and Samuel relayed, "Ms. Tanaka notes that your company's stock dipped slightly after the latest earnings call. She hopes it was merely a market fluctuation." Victor's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming on the table. The questions felt like probes, surgical and unsettling, as if Kiyomi were peeling back their carefully curated facades. Unseen in the shadows of the room, moving with the practiced grace of someone trained to be invisible, was Maya Johnson, a waitress whose presence was as unremarkable as the air itself. Her crisp white apron was pristine, her movements silent as she glided along the periphery, refilling water glasses before they dipped too low, clearing plates with the stealth of a cat. To Edward and Victor, she was a nonentity, a pair of hands serving their needs, nothing more. But Maya was a watcher, her eyes sharp and her mind attuned to the nuances of human behavior. She noticed the way Victor's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his fork, a sign of barely concealed frustration. She saw the way Edward's smile grew brittle, a mask cracking under the strain of Kiyomi's silence. And most of all, she watched Kiyomi, whose calm demeanor and piercing gaze felt achingly familiar. Maya had grown up in Osaka, the daughter of an American diplomat, and a Japanese mother, her childhood steeped in the rhythms and nuances of Japanese culture. She had attended a local school, her days filled with the cadence of the language, her friendships forged in its subtleties. Japanese wasn't just a language to her, It was the sound of her mother's lullabies, the laughter of her friends on summer evenings, the quiet respect of a teacher's instruction. Now, working 2 jobs to fund her fine arts degree at NYU, those years felt like a distant dream, but the language still lived in her bones. As she listened to Kiyomi's soft, formal Japanese, she understood not just the words but the layers beneath them, the honorifics, the subtle inflections that carried weight and meaning. When Kiyomi asked about Edward's trip to Singapore, Maya heard the polite but pointed implication, "I know you were scouting competitors there." When she mentioned the stock dip, Maya caught the faint note of disapproval, as if Kiyomi were chastising a careless student. These were not random observations. They were the moves of a master strategist, and Maya was the only one in the room who could hear them. The executive's frustration was growing, their voices taking on a sharper edge. Victor, emboldened by his irritation, leaned forward, his tone condescending, as he addressed Kiyomi, directly speaking slowly, as if she were a child. "Ms. Tanaka, we're offering a very generous deal. Lots of money. Big opportunity." He held up his fingers as if the gesture would bridge the language gap. Maya, standing by the service door, felt a flush of second-hand shame. The insult was so blatant, so ignorant, that it stung even her. She saw Kiyomi's eyes flicker not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness, as if she had seen this kind of arrogance too many times before. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he translated dutifully, "Ms. Tanaka understands the financial proposal." But Maya heard what Kiyomi actually said. "Please inform this man that his loud voice is more disruptive than persuasive." The discrepancy was jarring, and Maya's grip on the silver water pitcher tightened, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate dismantling of respect, and Kiyomi was cataloging every moment of it. The tension reached a new peak when Edward, convinced that Kiyomi's silence was a sign of weakness or incompetence, decided to take control. He leaned toward Victor, his voice low but audible, as if Samuel and Kiyomi were mere furniture. "This is going nowhere, Vic. She's either clueless or playing us. Let's push the revised offer, cut the R&D valuation, and fold it into general assets. She won't notice, and we'll save millions." Victor's eyes gleamed, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Smart. She's out of her depth. Just have the translator sell it as a simplified deal." Maya froze her breath, catching in her throat. They were plotting to deceive Kiyomi right in front of her, using her language barrier as a shield for their greed. The audacity of it, the sheer arrogance, ignited something deep within her. A memory of her mother teaching her that silence in Japanese culture could be a sign of strength, not submission. Kiyomi's calm, watchful gaze suddenly felt like a mirror reflecting Maya's own quiet resilience. Maya's mind raced. Her manager's voice echoed in her head. "You are invisible, Maya. Do not speak to the guests unless spoken to. Ever." Breaking that rule meant instant dismissal, the end of her job, her tuition payments, her precarious life in New York. But as she looked at Kiyomi, at the profound intelligence in her eyes, she saw something else, a woman surrounded by people who saw only her limitations, not her strength. It was a look Maya knew well, the look of being underestimated, of being invisible, not because of her role, but because of who she was, a black woman, a student, a server, in a world that dismissed her as inconsequential. Kiyomi's voice broke through her thoughts, a soft murmur in Japanese, almost to herself. "Is there no one here who sees?" The words hit Maya like a lightning bolt, a call to action she couldn't ignore. Her heart pounded, her palms sweaty. But she made her decision. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and stepped forward, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The game was about to change, and Maya Johnson, the invisible waitress, was about to become the most important person in the room. Chapter 2. Maya's Stand and the Unraveling Truth. The air in the private dining room of the Golden Crest was no longer just thick with tension. It was electric, charged with the weight of unspoken truths and the precipice of a moment that could alter destinies. The crystal chandelier above cast fractured light across the mahogany table, glinting off the half-eaten plates of seared tuna and the untouched glasses of Chateau Margaux, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Edward Langston and Victor Hayes sat on one side, their earlier confidence now tinged with impatience, their whispers growing bolder as they plotted to exploit what they perceived as Kiyomi Tanaka's weakness. Across from them, Kiyomi sat serene, her dark eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity, her silence a canvas onto which the two executives projected their arrogance. Samuel Lin. Her translator remained a stoic presence, his face betraying nothing as he relayed her brief responses. But the true pivot point of the evening was Maya Johnson, the waitress who had been invisible until this moment, now stepping forward with a resolve that burned brighter than the chandelier's glow. Maya's heart thundered in her chest as she approached the table, her steps deliberate on the plush Persian rug. The weight of her decision pressed against her ribs, a mix of fear and conviction that made her hands tremble beneath her crisp white apron. She stopped a respectful distance from Kiyomi's side, her breath shallow, and then, in a gesture that felt like stepping off a cliff, she bowed a deep, formal bow from the waist, the kind she hadn't performed since her childhood in Osaka. It was a bow of reverence reserved for elders, teachers, or those of profound status, and it sliced through the room's tension like a blade. Edward and Victor froze their conversation, halting mid-sentence, their heads snapping toward her. "What the hell is this?" Victor muttered, his voice a mix of confusion and irritation, his lips curling into a sneer. "Can we get some more water or something?" Edward's eyes narrowed, his smile tightening into a thin line, but he said nothing, sensing a shift he couldn't yet name. Maya straightened her gaze, locking onto Kiyomi's. In flawless Japanese, her Kyoto dialect soft, yet clear as a temple bell, she spoke. "Tanaka-sama, please forgive my impertinence. I am but a humble server here, but to stand by and witness this disrespect is a stain upon this house and my own honor. If you permit me, I wish to assist." The words, formal and laced with humility, hung in the air, a declaration that shattered the room's fragile equilibrium. Edward and Victor's mouths fell open, their expressions mirroring the shock of men who had just seen a statue come to life. Samuel Lin's head jerked up, his professional composure cracking his eyes, darting between Maya and Kiyomi with a mixture of disbelief and awe. But it was Kiyomi's reaction that carried the most weight. Her serene mask faltered, her eyes widening for a fleeting moment, a glimmer of surprise breaking through her stoic facade. Then slowly her lips parted, and a small, choked sound escaped, a sound of relief, of recognition, as if she had been lost in a foreign land and had just heard her native tongue spoken with the warmth of home. You understand?" Kiyomi asked in Japanese, her voice trembling with emotion, each syllable fragile, yet heavy with meaning. "You understand not just the words, but what lies beneath them." Maya nodded, her own voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I understand everything, Tanaka-sama. I grew up in Osaka. I hear not only your words, but the heart within them." The exchange, lasting mere seconds, was a seismic shift, a reordering of the room's power dynamic. Edward and Victor were no longer the masters of this negotiation. They were outsiders, locked out of a conversation that pulsed with more authenticity than anything they had managed in the past hour. What is she saying? Edward demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion, his finger jabbing toward Maya. Who are you? What did you just say to her? Maya didn't flinch, her attention fixed on Kiyomi, her posture a quiet defiance of the men who had dismissed her as inconsequential. Kiyomi's eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, met Maya's, and she gestured with a frail, elegant hand toward the empty chair beside her. It was not a suggestion, but an invitation, a command cloaked in grace. Please, she said in Japanese, her voice soft but resolute. Samuel, regaining his composure, translated for the bewildered executives, though his gaze remained on Maya, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Ms. Tanaka requests that the young lady join us at the table. Victor scoffed, his voice dripping with incredulity. Join us? She's the waitress. This is absurd. But Edward, ever the strategist, sensed the tide turning. His earlier confidence was giving way to unease, his mind racing to recalculate the variables of this unexpected disruption. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes flicking between Maya and Kiyomi, silent but watchful, like a predator reassessing its prey. Maya hesitated for a heartbeat, the weight of the moment pressing against her. To sit at this table, to step out of the shadows of her role, was to cross a line she could never uncross. But Kiyomi's gaze anchored her, imbuing her with a purpose that dwarfed her fears. With a quiet grace she hadn't known she possessed, Maya pulled out the chair and sat the fine linen napkin, feeling alien in her lap. The room seemed to tilt, the opulent surroundings. The crystal glasses, the silver cutlery, the half-eaten plates of Michelin-starred cuisine, fading into a surreal backdrop. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a bridge, a conduit, across a chasm of cultural ignorance and deceit. Edward broke the silence, his voice dangerously low, his glare fixed on Samuel as if Maya were still beneath his notice. I think we deserve an explanation. What is going on here? Before Samuel could respond, Kiyomi spoke directly to Maya, her Japanese now infused with a quiet authority that commanded the room. Maya listened intently, then turned to the executives, her voice clear and measured, carrying a weight that belied her humble appearance. My name is Maya Johnson. Ms. Tanaka has asked me to translate for her. She feels it is time for you to understand the full context of this meeting. Samuel nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that his role as a neutral translator was insufficient for what was unfolding. What was needed now was not just words, but truth. Kiyomi began to speak, her voice steady, but laced with a raw vulnerability that made Maya's chest ache. She didn't speak of contracts or stock valuations. She spoke of a night in Tokyo, a rain-slicked road, and the screech of tires that had changed everything. Maya translated her voice, painting a vivid picture in the opulent room. Some time ago, Ms. Tanaka was in a serious car accident. She sustained a traumatic brain injury that affected the language centers of her brain, Broca's and Wernicke's areas. Her cognitive abilities, her memory, her brilliance as an engineer, they remain untouched. She is the same woman who built Tanaka Biolabs from nothing. But the injury has caused a rare form of expressive aphasia. Under stress, her brain reverts to its most fundamental pathways, her native Japanese. The English she once spoke fluently is locked away, inaccessible, especially in moments like this. Maya paused, letting the gravity of the revelation settle her eyes, flicking to Edward and Victor, who exchanged a glance of stunned disbelief. Why wasn't this disclosed? Victor blurted, his tone more accusatory than sympathetic, his hands gripping the table's edge. Kiyomi's eyes flashed, and she spoke a single sharp sentence in Japanese. Maya translated her voice, carrying the same fierce pride she heard in Kiyomi's words. Miss Tanaka did not want her injury to define her. She refused to be seen as a liability, or an object of pity. This deal is not just a transaction. It is her legacy. She came here to assess your character to see if you are worthy of carrying it forward. The words landed like a thunderclap, exposing the executive's condescension as a fatal miscalculation. Their smirks, their whispered conspiracies, their slow, loud attempts to simplify the deal for a woman they assumed was incompetent. They had been a test, and they were failing spectacularly. Edward, ever the opportunist, saw not a tragedy but an opening. His face softened into a mask of sympathy, his voice dripping with false concern. "Ms. Tanaka, this is heartbreaking. We had no idea. Please, accept our deepest apologies. This changes everything. We can simplify the deal, take the burden off. You handle the details so you can focus on your recovery." Victor nodded quick to follow the cue, his expression a caricature of compassion. "Absolutely. We can expedite this. Sign a letter of intent tonight. It's for your own good." Maya's stomach churned as she translated their words, hearing the predatory undertone beneath their feigned empathy. They weren't seeing a woman of strength. They were seeing a vulnerable target, a chance to seize her company at a discount. Kiyomi listened to the translation, her face unreadable, but her eyes held a flicker of the same weary disappointment Maya had seen earlier. She spoke again, her tone deceptively light, and Maya translated with precision. "Ms. Tanaka is curious about the revised valuation of Tanaka Biolabs' R&D division. The initial offer valued it at $120 million, but in your new proposal, that figure seems to have vanished, folded into a vague general assets category." Victor waved a dismissive hand, his smile strained. "It's just a clerical simplification. The overall number is what matters. It's all in there." But Maya, her years of helping her diplomat father proofread documents, giving her a keen eye for deception, caught the evasive language in the contract. She held up a hand, her voice firm. "One moment, please." Switching to Japanese, she addressed Kiyomi directly. "Tanaka-sama, the language in their revised contract is deliberately vague. Clause 8C grants them unilateral control to renegotiate your intellectual property licenses post-merger, potentially allowing them to sell off your core patents. And Section 14, which they called a redundancy protocol, is a non-compete clause so broad it could prevent you and your team from working in your field for a decade." Kiyomi's eyes narrowed, a subtle nod, urging Maya to continue. The room grew quieter, the executives' confidence eroding as they realized their plan was being dissected by the very person they had ignored. Edward's patience snapped. "What's the holdup?" "Just tell her it's a standard agreement," he barked, his face reddening. Maya met his glare, unflinching. "I am ensuring Ms. Tanaka understands every clause with absolute clarity, Mr. Langston. Precision is critical in a deal of this magnitude." Her formal tone, coming from a waitress, stunned him into silence. Kiyomi spoke again, her voice carrying a steely edge, and Maya translated. "Ms. Tanaka finds it curious that a valuation as significant as her R&D divisions would be omitted for clerical reasons. She requests you point to the exact line item where it is accounted for." Edward and Victor scrambled through their copies of the contract, their frantic rustling a stark contrast to Kiyomi's calm. A bead of sweat trickled down Victor's temple, his earlier bravado crumbling. Then came the masterstroke. Kiyomi nodded to Samuel, who reached into his jacket and placed a small digital recorder on the table. He pressed play, and Edward's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "Let's push the revised offer, cut the R&D valuation, and fold it into general assets. She won't notice." Victor's voice followed, dripping with contempt. "She's out of her depth. Just have the translator sell it." The recording played their entire conspiracy, every greedy, dismissive word echoing like a verdict. When it stopped, the silence was deafening. Edward's face was ashen. Victor's eyes fixed on the recorder as if it were a live grenade. Maya's heart raced, but she stood tall, her role no longer that of a bystander, but a witness to justice unfolding. Kiyomi sat back, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. She wasn't the vulnerable figure they had assumed. She was a strategist who had let them dig their own graves. The stage was set for her final move, and Maya, the waitress who had dared to speak, was now at the heart of it. The private dining room at the Golden Crest, once a gilded stage for ambition and deceit, now felt like a courtroom in the aftermath of a damning verdict. The crystal chandelier's light seemed harsher, casting stark shadows across the mahogany table where the remnants of an extravagant meal sat forgotten, half-eaten plates of roasted duck, crystal glasses of untouched wine, and a leather-bound contract that now lay like a confession of guilt. Edward Langston and Victor Hayes sat frozen, their faces pale, their earlier arrogance replaced by a stunned silence that bordered on panic. The digital recorder still resting in the center of the table had just played back their whispered conspiracy, exposing their attempt to deceive Kiyomi Tanaka in a deal worth $500 million. Kiyomi herself sat across from them, her posture regal, her dark eyes gleaming with a quiet, unyielding strength. Samuel Lin. Her translator maintained his stoic composure, but his gaze flickered with a subtle awe directed not at his employer, but at Maya Johnson, the waitress who had turned the evening upside down. Maya sat at the table, her heart pounding, the weight of her actions settling over her like a storm cloud. She had crossed a line, defied every rule of her job, and now the room held its breath, waiting for Kiyomi's next move. Kiyomi's eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Edward, and Victor, her silence more commanding than any speech. Then, in a moment that seemed to suspend time, she leaned forward slightly, her lips parting. "This negotiation," she said in English, her voice quiet but clear, each word carrying the weight of a gavel, "is over." The shock was instantaneous, a thunderclap in the opulent room. Her accent was faint, elegant, but the clarity of her words was unmistakable, cutting through the air like a blade. Edward's jaw dropped, his silver hair catching the light as he gaped at her, while Victor's hands gripped the table's edge, his knuckles white. For the entire evening they had assumed Kiyomi's silence in English was a sign of weakness, a barrier they could exploit. Now, her sudden command of the language revealed the truth. She had been in control all along. Her aphasia, a challenge she had overcome in this critical moment, perhaps through sheer will or the release of the evening's tension. Maya's breath caught her eyes widening as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. Kiyomi wasn't just ending a deal. She was dismantling the men who had underestimated her. Edward recovered first, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. "Miss Tanaka, please, let's not be hasty. We can clarify any misunderstandings." But Kiyomi raised a hand, a subtle gesture that silenced him instantly. She turned to Maya, her expression softening, and spoke in Japanese, her voice now warm, almost tender. "Thank you, Maya-san. You have given me more than words tonight. You have given me truth." Maya translated for the executives, her voice steady, despite the emotions swirling within her. "Ms. Tanaka expresses her gratitude to me for ensuring clarity in this meeting. But the words she spoke to Edward and Victor were only a fraction of what Kiyomi had said. In Japanese, Kiyomi had added, "Your courage has restored my faith in the unseen strength of others." The personal weight of those words settled deep in Maya's chest, a validation she hadn't known she needed. Kiyomi rose from her chair, her movements graceful but resolute, Samuel swiftly moving to assist her. She gave a slight nod to Maya, a gesture of profound respect, before turning toward the door. But before she left, she paused, her gaze sweeping over Edward and Victor one last time. In Japanese, she spoke a final sentence, her tone calm but laced with steel. Maya translated her voice, ringing with the authority she borrowed from Kiyomi. Ms. Tanaka wishes you to know that your actions tonight have revealed your character, and it is not one she trusts with her life's work. The words landed like a sentence final and irrevocable. Edward's face crumpled, his earlier confidence reduced to ash, while Victor stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. With that, Kiyomi walked out, Samuel following the soft click of the door, echoing like a gavel's fall. The $500 million deal was dead, and with it, the careers of two men who had gambled on deceit and lost. The room felt cavernous in Kiyomi's absence, the silence oppressive. Maya remained seated, her hands clasped in her lap, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. She had exposed a fraud, yes, but at what cost? Her job, her tuition, her precarious life in New York. All of it hung in the balance. Before she could process further, the service door burst open and Mr. Carver, the restaurant's manager, stormed in his face, a mask of fury. His wiry frame seemed to vibrate with rage, his eyes narrowing on Maya, as if she were a stain on his pristine reputation. "Maya Johnson," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, "do you have any idea what you've done? You sat at a guest's table, interfered in a private meeting, and now I've got Langston's legal team threatening to sue us into oblivion. You're fired, effective immediately. Pack your things and get out." His words were a guillotine slicing through Maya's fragile hopes. Her rent was overdue. Her next tuition payment loomed, and now her only source of income was gone. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came, only a hollow ache in her chest. Before she could move, the dining room door opened again, this time with a quiet, deliberate creak. Samuel Lynn stood in the threshold, his presence commanding his suit as immaculate as ever. "Mr. Carver," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that made the manager's rage seem petty. "You are mistaken. Ms. Johnson was acting on a direct request from Ms. Kiyomi Tanaka, my employer. Her actions were not a breach of protocol, but a fulfillment of a critical need, one that neither you nor your guests were equipped to provide." Carver blinked, his momentum faltering, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What? She's just a—" Samuel took a step forward, his gaze unyielding. "As for Mr. Langston's threats, I suggest he reconsider. We have a recording of him and Mr. Hayes conspiring to commit contractual fraud. My next call is to Tanaka Biolabs' legal team, and I assure you they will have far greater concerns than a waitress's conduct." Carver's face drained of color, his authority unraveling in the face of Samuel's quiet power. Samuel turned to Maya, his expression softening, a warmth in his eyes that felt like a lifeline. "Ms. Tanaka would like to speak with you. She's waiting in her car downstairs. Please come with me." He glanced at Carver, his tone firm but polite. "Ensure Miss Johnson's belongings are gathered and delivered to the address I provide. She will not be returning." Without waiting for a response, he held the door open for Maya. She stood, her legs unsteady, and walked past Carver, whose stunned silence was louder than his earlier tirade. The main dining room was a blur as she passed through other servers, pausing to stare, their whispers trailing her like a wake. She folded her apron, placing it on a service counter, a final act of leaving behind the life she had known. The weight of their eyes followed her, but she kept her head high, following Samuel out into the cool Manhattan night. At the curb, a sleek black Rolls-Royce idled its engine, a soft hum, its presence a silent testament to power. Samuel opened the rear door, and Maya slid inside the door, closing with a heavy thud that muted the city's chaos. The interior was a cocoon of luxury-rich leather, the faint scent of jasmine and the soft glow of cabin lights that cast Kiyomi Tanaka in a warm, almost ethereal light. She looked tired, her face etched with the strain of the evening, but her eyes were alive with gratitude and resolve. She leaned back against the plush headrest, closing her eyes for a moment, as if gathering herself. When she opened them, they fixed on Maya with an intensity that made the world outside the car fade away. Maya Kiyomi began her English halting but deliberate, each word a small victory over her injury. Tonight, you did not just translate. You saw me. You heard what others could not. She paused, her voice softening. For months, I have been trapped. People speak to me as if I am broken, or they speak around me as if I am not there. You gave me my voice back, not just my words, but my dignity. Maya's throat tightened, her hands twisting in her lap. Ms. Tanaka, I didn't know what would happen. I just couldn't stand by and watch them disrespect you. I thought I'd lose everything. Kiyomi's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, the first Maya had seen all evening. And yet, you acted. That is rare, Maya. That is strength. Kiyomi leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. The accident changed me. It showed me how quickly the world turns on you when it senses weakness. My company, my life's work is vulnerable now. I need someone I can trust, not just with words, but with truth. I need someone who sees beyond titles, beyond money, to the heart of things. She paused, her eyes searching Maya's. I am not offering you a job as a translator. I am offering you a place beside me, in my foundation, the Tanaka Foundation for Innovation and Arts. We fund brilliant minds, engineers, artists, dreamers. I want you to help me find them, to travel with me, to be my eyes and ears, my confidant. Your education will be paid for your degree at NYU, any graduate studies you choose anywhere in the world. You will have a home in my building, a salary that ensures you never worry about money again. This is not just a job, Maya. It is a life. Maya's mind reeled, the offer too vast to comprehend. Her tiny apartment with its flickering lights, the constant grind of bills. The fear of falling behind it could all vanish. But more than that, Kiyomi was offering purpose, a chance to step out of the shadows and into a world where her voice mattered. Why me? Maya whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her own ordinariness. I'm just a student, a waitress. I'm nobody. Kiyomi reached across the space, her hand resting lightly on Maya's, her touch grounding. You are not nobody, she said firmly. You saw me when I was invisible. That is not a skill. It is who you are. In a world of Langstons and Hayes, that is a gift beyond measure. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, not of fear, but of a profound sense of being seen, truly seen for the first time. The years of feeling like a ghost, of navigating a world that often overlooked her, had led to this moment. She took a shaky breath, her voice steadying. Yes, Ms. Tanaka, I would be honored. Kiyomi's smile widened, a spark of joy breaking through her fatigue. Kiyomi, she corrected gently. From now on, you will call me Kiyomi. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding into the stream of Manhattan traffic, the city's lights blurring outside the window. Maya looked out, her heart swelling with a certainty she had never known. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was on the cusp of a new life, one where her voice, her vision, would shape the future. Edward and Victor, meanwhile, had slunk away, their reputations in tatters, their futures uncertain. The night had shifted, and Maya Johnson was at its center, ready to step into the unknown. The Manhattan skyline stretched before Maya Johnson like a canvas of ambition, its towering spires of glass and steel twinkling under the night sky, a constellation of human dreams etched in light. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her new office in the Tanaka Foundation's headquarters, a sleek modern building in the heart of New York's Flatiron District. The space was a far cry from the cramped fluorescent-lit back room of the Golden Crest where she had once folded napkins and polished silverware to make ends meet. The office was minimalist, yet warm, with pale wood floors, a single bonsai tree on a lacquered desk, and walls adorned with vibrant abstract paintings, works by young artists the foundation supported. It had been 3 months since that fateful night at the restaurant, and Maya's life had transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined. The weight of her old worries overdue, rent looming, tuition payments, the constant grind of survival had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose that felt both exhilarating and daunting. As she gazed out at the city, her reflection faint in the glass, she thought back to the dinner that had changed everything and the lessons it had etched into her soul. The aftermath of that evening at the Golden Crest had unfolded like a storm. Edward Langston and Victor Hayes, the once confident executives of Langston Biotech, had left the private dining room in a haze of disgrace, their $500 million deal reduced to ashes by their own arrogance. The recording of their conspiracy, played by Samuel Lin at Kiyomi Tanaka's behest, had not only killed the negotiation, but also sparked a legal firestorm. Within days, Tanaka Biolabs DT's legal team had filed a complaint for attempted fraud, backed by the damning audio evidence. The business press, hungry for scandal, had pounced, and headlines screamed of Langston Biotech's ethical collapse. Edward's carefully curated image as a titan of industry unraveled, his silver hair and polished suits no match for the public's outrage. Victor, ever the opportunist, had tried to distance himself, but his complicity was undeniable. Their careers, once glittering with promise, were now cautionary tales whispered in boardrooms, a reminder that greed could topple even the most powerful. For Maya, the fallout had been both a reckoning and a rebirth. The moment she had stepped into Kiyomi's Rolls-Royce that night, she had crossed a threshold into a new world. Her firing by Mr. Carver, the restaurant's irate manager, had stung, but Samuel's intervention had turned it into a footnote. Kiyomi's offer to join the Tanaka Foundation, to have her education fully funded, to be given a home and a salary that banished financial worry, had felt like a dream too vast to grasp. Yet it was real, and Maya had seized it with both hands. She had moved into a sleek apartment in Kiyomi's building, its windows offering the same breathtaking view of Manhattan she now saw from her office. Her tuition at NYU was paid, her fine arts degree now a certainty rather than a desperate hope. But more than the material gifts, it was the sense of purpose that anchored her. Working for the Tanaka Foundation, she was no longer a waitress serving the elite. She was a partner in a mission to uplift brilliant minds, female engineers, daring artists, dreamers who defied the world's expectations. Maya's new role was multifaceted, a blend of cultural liaison, talent scout, and confidant. She traveled with Kiyomi to Tokyo, Berlin, and Sao Paulo, attending conferences where young innovators pitched ideas that could reshape the future. She sat in on grant reviews, her keen eye for nuance, helping identify candidates whose passion matched their potential. She learned to navigate the world of philanthropy, a realm as complex as the corporate one she had disrupted that night at the Golden Crest. Yet, it was the quiet moments with Kiyomi, that meant the most late nights in the Foundation's Tokyo office, sipping green tea, as Kiyomi shared stories of her own journey from a young engineer in a male-dominated field to a global icon. Those conversations, often in Japanese, were a bridge to Maya's past in Osaka, a reminder of the language and culture that had shaped her. Kiyomi, in turn, relied on Maya's ability to see beyond words, to read the unspoken emotions in a room, a skill that had proven invaluable in that fateful dinner. The lessons of that night were never far from Maya's mind. Standing at her office window, she reflected on what she had learned, the truths that had crystallized in the wake of her decision to speak. The first was the power of integrity. She had acted not for gain, but because it was right, because the disrespect shown to Kiyomi had been a violation of something deeper than business etiquette. It had been an assault on dignity. That choice, made in a moment of fear, had opened a door to a life she could never have imagined. The second lesson was the danger of assumptions. Edward and Victor had seen Kiyomi's silence, her foreignness, as weakness, just as they had seen Maya's apron and quiet demeanor as insignificance. They had judged based on surface's language status, appearance, and it had blinded them to the strength beneath. Maya, too, had once underestimated herself, believing her role as a waitress defined her worth. But Kiyomi had seen her just as Maya had seen Kiyomi, proving that true understanding transcends titles and barriers. The third lesson, perhaps the most profound, was the transformative power of courage. Maya had been terrified, that night, her heart pounding as she stepped forward, knowing the cost could be her job, her future. Yet that single act of defiance had shifted the course of her life. It had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act, despite it, to stand for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. That lesson now guided her work at the Foundation, where she sought out others who dared to challenge the status quo, who refused to let the world's judgments silence their dreams. It was a mission that resonated deeply, a call to amplify the voices of those who, like her, had once been invisible. As Maya turned from the window, her gaze fell on a framed photograph on her desk, a candid shot of her and Kiyomi at a recent Foundation event in Kyoto. Both smiling, the city's ancient temples blurred in the background. It was a reminder of the bond they had forged, one built on mutual respect and shared experience. Kiyomi, too, had been transformed by that night. Her aphasia, though still a challenge, had eased in the months since her English returning in fits and starts, a testament to her resilience. She had confided in Maya that the dinner had been more than a business negotiation. It had been a test of character, not just for Edward and Victor, but for herself. The accident had shaken her faith in her own strength, but Maya's intervention had reminded her that vulnerability was not weakness. It was a call to find allies who saw the truth. The educational impact of that night extended beyond Maya's personal growth. Through her work at the Foundation, she was helping to spread its lessons to a broader audience. The Tanaka Foundation didn't just fund projects, it fostered a philosophy of inclusivity and empathy. Maya had spearheaded a new initiative, a mentorship program for young women from marginalized backgrounds, teaching them not just technical skills, but the importance of seeing and being seen. She shared her story at workshops, her voice steady as she recounted the night she chose to speak, encouraging others to trust their instincts to act when they witnessed injustice. The program had already reached hundreds, its participants, a mix of aspiring engineers, artists, and innovators, each carrying forward the ripple effect of that one evening at the Golden Crest. But the lesson that resonated most deeply was one of connection. Maya had learned that the world was full of people like Kiyomi, brilliant, resilient, but often overlooked because of language, culture, or circumstance. Her role now was to find them, to listen to their stories, to give them a platform to shine. It was a responsibility she carried with pride, knowing that every grant awarded, every artist supported was a step toward a world where no one was invisible. She thought of her mother in Osaka, who had taught her to listen with her heart, and her father, who had shown her the power of quiet observation. Their lessons had converged in that dining room, guiding her to see Kiyomi's strength when others saw only limitation. As Maya prepared for her next trip with Kiyomi, a conference in Seoul to scout new talent, she felt a surge of anticipation. The journey ahead was daunting, a path filled with challenges she couldn't yet foresee. But she was no longer the waitress who had stood trembling at the edge of a decision. She was Maya Johnson, a woman who had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in a world that needed her vision. She gathered her notes, her laptop, and a small jade pendant Kiyomi had given her, a twin to the one Kiyomi wore that night. It was a reminder of their shared moment, a talisman of the strength they had found in each other. The story of that dinner was more than a tale of a failed deal. It was a testament to the power of seeing others as they truly are. For those who heard it, it carried a call to action, to look beyond the surface, to listen with empathy, to act with courage. It was a reminder that heroes are not always the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes they are the quiet ones, the waitresses, the overlooked, who step forward when it matters most. Maya's journey was just beginning, but as she stepped out of her office, the city's lights stretching before her, she knew she was ready. She was no longer a speck in the vastness of New York. She was a star burning bright, ready to illuminate the path for others. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the world, others were waiting to be seen, their voices ready to rise, inspired by a night when a waitress spoke Japanese and changed everything.